Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiardjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern to try and figure out what the future for smarter buildings look like. So it's really good to have you all here. Our profiles are on mondaylive.org if you're interested to know who we are. And just to point out, the views expressed here on this call are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make this interactive on the Zoom chat. I think you guys do that really well. So, and if you want anything that's on the slide deck, it's also available on mondaylive.org. So this being March, we are continuing our month exploring the topic of governance. We had a really interesting session last week, so hoping to continue that. Our agenda, our normal news and trends, and then on the governance side of things, we really want to talk about the sort of the relevance of governance and standards and how they interplay with each other. I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion. So looking forward to that. But before, as always, I'm going to hand it over to Ken for an update from Automated Buildings. Ken?
Thanks, Anto. Lots going on, as you're aware. Up in the top left-hand corner there's a summary of last Monday's Governance in an Age of AI and Open Systems. It's been well received. A lot of folks creating that interest. Then just over in the middle of the screen there, we basically have evolved. You guys have made us evolve. I think that's probably a better way of describing it, to thought leadership. We've been kind of wondering what it is that automated buildings really does. And sometimes it gets a bit confusing even for us. But the one thing I think we all have in common is that we are laying out thought leadership. And so we've taken Kelly and we rebranded her from a brand manager to a thought leadership liaison. And if you click on there, you'll see some examples of that. When we hit for marketing to try and get our sponsors, they often attach us to the marketing department. And of course, the marketing department has been trained to sell Coca-Cola or controls or whatever they're told to sell. And they have little knowledge of what it is we're trying to do here, that we're trying to reshape the industry. And that is the value, I believe, of automated buildings, is your posts and how you're shaping the industry. The other thing that's happening is the stuff everybody touches as we get more and more people as sponsors and as contributing editors. We keep touching different areas of the industry. So we just have to change our focus a little bit, and that's going to be our thing. The other thing that we saw is we see a real need because of the speed of what's going on. We were just talking about this before, that we always used to focus on conventions that occurred once a year. And then we started looking at Monday Live, where we appeared every week. And then Automated Buildings came on, and we were almost putting out stuff daily. And we just checked up Kimon as we're coming in and told him he was doing something within the next 20 minutes. So I think what you're seeing is a common speed kind of increase, and the thought leadership, where we used to think a lot about thought leadership, I'm thinking that thought leadership is something that's evolving so rapidly that that we have to all hang our hats on it. Anyway, enough of that. The talk today is on governance. We've linked to Keith's article there, why we took the guardrails off. I think that's a good point. We need the other side of the equation. We don't want to be restricted, but we can be led by governance. Sunday was Women's Day, and we put this inclusion gearing up for the autonomous future. Carrie has written a post about that, and that's actually been really well received. I was amazed at the amount of interest that was on that. Below that, there's this thing we picked up from Europe, IoT maturity, when it's kind of gives us an interesting perspective of where we're going. And there's a paper there that you can click down and load down, which is probably worth doing. Actually, if you go to the page, this isn't the same page that's on the site right now. We've added from our new editor, a post on graphs, the knowledge graphs, and we're very pleased. Ben touches the GitHub crowd, and it's been again very well received. Often when a new editor comes, they bring with them their crowd, and their crowd then starts connecting, and this is how we grow. So I think that's a good observation. Of course, our free education sessions are online right now. Kelly's been working to do a summary of each one of them. She's got a few more of them done. The one below is done, which is good because Keith's not here today, but you can see what went on in Vegas there. The actual summary is there, and there's also a AI summary of it, so you can kind of just get a quick sense of what went on there. So we'll be working through all 16 of our sessions, and they're all live now, but we're going to do a summary on each one of them for you to see if you want to sit down and watch one of these or listen to them while you're driving. And I think maybe the other thing too is if you do have time, if you can follow me, I'm posting a tremendous amount of stuff, and I'm reposting a lot of stuff because I have to go through all of this just to try and get a grasp of what's going on. I don't profess to say I know what's going on, but I'm trying my best, honest. But what I do is when I see something that I think I should share with you guys, I just post it. So I've got an awful lot of posts, and I think it's worthwhile to just blur through them, and because some of them will be of interest to you. There'll be probably a lot that aren't of interest to you, but I'm sure there'll be at least some. And I think that's it. Back to you, Anto.
Great, thank you, Ken. I think your points about thought leadership is spot on, and I'm sure we'll come back to talk about that again. So good job on that initiative.
Thank you.
Rick.
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, just I didn't get a chance to update this, but I was just going to go back over the same things. We're over on the far right. We're going to be talking about new working groups. So the working groups that you see in the main section of the page are moving forward, and then the new ones that are going to be focused, are projects and working groups like 231 and UDMI. OpenUSD and audiovisual are we're looking to have take more shape over the next week. The UDMI sort of pre-announcement here is that looks like that is going to, there's still some mechanics to happen, but the UDMI project is going to move under C4SB soon. The steps are getting started as we speak. So we're going to have
Rick, can you do like a 20-second sort of explanation of UDMI, where it came from and why it's important?
Sure. So UDMI is it's Universal Device Management Interface, and it was something that so we've heard about it, right? I think everybody's kind of heard about what happened, or what Google was doing in terms of defining IoT devices and how they could be managed and better understood in the cloud. And the UDMI effort has been adopted. A lot of vendors, so Distech and Delta and LinkSpring are already using UDMI for part of their architecture. The working groups of UDMI have not been affiliated with anything like like the Linux Foundation. It's been a standalone sort of effort that has had dozens and dozens and dozens of people involved with it. But they wanted to have a more formal organization, be part of a larger ecosystem, and so now the UDMI, what is like an evolving or a de facto standard or evolving standard, will be joining this other list of working groups under C4SB. And where the UDMI sort of standard fits in the technology stack will obviously it's on the device, it's about devices. How it then relates to the other work we're doing with semantics and what we're doing with the digital building profiles, for instance, and everything else will be uh, further defined as we go forward. But one of the key things we're excited about there is that we've got what's shaping up to be really clear paths for vendors of different device types to follow the standards of whether it's Landmark, BACnet, or UDMI. We've got evolving standards for how to comply with semantic standards, which is part of the semantic working group, and then how all those physical and data layers help make things like digital twins and cybersecurity and how it makes AI easier to implement. We're getting to the point where we can actually connect the dots between the physical to the data to the application layer and have really good references of how vendors and how customers can come together to be on the same page relative to what to provide and what to ask for. It's kind of a exciting time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Anybody else want to bring up any aspect? I think, Kimon, you want to do a report on scale,
Sure.
please?
Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So last year I went to scale 22x. Ken actually pointed me to it. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is not for me. But then when I went there, I think it's one of the best conferences. And this year it's even more so. And part of the reason is kind of a mixture from very young, elementary school kids all the way to veterans in the industry. So for example, there's Ben Gertzel who kicked off. He's the person that actually coined the term AGI. And he was asked, when's AGI coming? And he said, I think it's coming sooner than later. There's all these conflicting ideas and opinions, but they're all kind of like what we do, right? We kind of argue about different things here as well, too. And the first day I went there, I was handed this sticker. It's called SLOP, Stop Slop. So that's kind of interesting. There's agentic AI, pumping out code, all that kind of stuff. And then there's also another contrasting opinion. This is a Linux conference, right? An open source Linux conference. And one of the leaders there said his opinion was that AI was going to eliminate the need for open source, which was kind of jarring hearing at an open source conference. And I go, what do you mean by that? So I interviewed him, and I'm going to be posting that. The other thing that I saw, this is interesting. This is a group called Black Hills Information Security. They were passing out card games and a comic book and instructions for that card game on how to deal with security. And the theme there throughout the conference is people don't read anymore. They want to be told stories. They want to kind of get engaged, hands-on, and reading is a big challenge. And I won't go through. I have about 20 people on the list, so I'll be posting articles about them. But two more that really stood out was Cindy Cohen, the executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And I forgot about this story, but it has to do with governance. The US government in the 1990s was classifying with a heavy-handed restrictive governance that tried to classify open source encryption code as a munition. In other words, if you shared, just like tanks, if you shared the code with others, you could be put away. So she fought that, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And if she didn't win that battle in the 90s, we wouldn't have the internet the way it was today. That's basically what they're saying, that we have to not only have governance to be safe, but we also have to not be overly restrictive. The other guy was John Mad Dog Hall, who's well-known in the industry, and his key message was about technology sovereignty. And he said, we don't want to become software serfs, therefore open source is the way to go. We have to keep access to our information, and we have to dictate how data and information is shared. Going back to Ben Gertzel's point on AGI, there was a lot of this is coming, this is happening, it's faster than we can move. We don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how much of it was hype, how much of it was real, but there's something in the middle there that's kind of intriguing. And the message really was that the only hope we have is if we don't have open source AI, if we don't have open source applications, this whole ramp up that's happening, whether it's hype or not with AGI, and quantum computing was another theme. John Mad Dog Hall said, do you guys realize that quantum computing is not here yet? It's coming soon. But there are groups that are storing encrypted information, database data sets, in anticipation of breaking them open when quantum is there. So what does that really mean for us? So all of this stuff has to be taken in context, I think. And a lot of it, there's opposite extreme beliefs there. But I think what I went there for was from the Coalition for Smarter Buildings perspective is how do we get the physical world connected to all of this digital stuff that's happening there? And I think that's what we're doing with the semantic modeling and bridging that we're been talking about. Anyway, there's going to be a whole series. I've started posting on LinkedIn. There's going to be some articles on automated buildings, and you'll get more details from there. There are videos and other content, really very interesting information. And it was back to back. There wasn't even a lunch break. I was eating peanuts in my chair while I was filming and taking notes the whole day.
Great, thank you. It sounds like it was a very interesting event. Looking forward to watching the videos. I have heard from some commentators, smart commentators, MIT kind of commentators online who have opined that AGI is actually with us today. I'm not sure I would go along with that, but people are all over the place in terms of where all of this is.
I think it's going to come from not the direction we think it is. Like I don't believe that I'm no expert, but I don't believe that LLMs are going to get us there to AGI. Meta's chief scientist, who just left Meta, by the way, they were working on a vision language, joint embedding is called. And yeah, it turns out that Elon Musk, love him or hate him, but he had it right. We use 2 eyes to drive cars. You don't need all this LiDAR and all this other stuff because, a text-based, language-based system will never be able to keep up with real time. And it's really not even the way the humans think, right? You can defeat any robot. I guarantee you, if you throw a fastball at them, it's going to hit them right in the head. But an 11-year-old can catch a fastball. Why? Because they're not thinking, humans don't think the ball is approaching me at 200 miles an hour. Bam, they get hit in the head. We're vision oriented. And so what they're coming up with is, and Meta's leading this with their VLJA architecture, is they're saying that vision is the right way that we're going to approach AGI because you generate meaning and not words. We attribute intelligence to words just because it sounds smart. And that's the big problem with hallucinations. Sounding smart is not the same thing as being smart. And so, yeah, I'm going to be posting on that as we come up. But yeah, we definitely decidedly don't use ChatGPT to run our central plans, and that's never going to work.
Okay. Any other thoughts or news as we shall move on? Let us move on then. So again, an AI perspective, and I'm going to sneak this in mainly for Rick, because Rick has been very, very certain about this, and this certainty is sort of being undermined. This is all about agents and money, because there's this service now called lobster.cash. You can go to lobster.cash in your browser, and it will provide money, credit cards for agents. Okay, and I first saw this about 2-3 weeks back, and I thought, sounds a little bit questionable. But I looked into it again. It's actually it's got this company, it's called Crossmint, behind it. And if you look at the companies who's behind Crossmint, these are kind of financial companies, right? So this may be still sort of questionable in terms of whether this will work in the long run. But they do seem to know what they're doing. So I'll leave that out there. Anybody have any strong reaction to this? Quick?
I think I'm muted, right?
Yes, you're muted.
So my basic point was that to be able to transfer property, which money is one, there are certain laws on the books that'll have to be dramatically changed for how accountability for property, something that, in this country, it's different than in other countries, but there will be a whole series of laws that'll have to be changed for for an agent to be accountable enough to sell my house for me. And I hope no one's listening and wanting to sell my house. I'd like to be able to stay. So it's just property laws. That's all. So if that's going to be undertaken to be changed, let me know when that gets past the Supreme Court. And otherwise, I'm comfortable with the fact that I'm not worried about an agent signing. I'm not gonna do very many transactions with agents.
Yeah, as is the case for most people. But directionally, this is interesting. That's the reason I wanted to bring it up, is that I think a lot of the assumptions that we make about how things work, maybe we need to put a question mark on those, some of those assumptions. That's really it. Anybody else have a thought on this?
You can give your 12-year-old a credit card too. Nothing new there.
Okay. Nobody else wants to chime in. We'll move on then. So on to governance. And the topic of today is governance and standards. So rather than sort of digging into a lot of the standards we know very well, the sort of the LONs and BACnets, I thought that's sort of a good place to start this conversation is to think about sort of other standards that have significantly impact us and basically everyone else in the world. And so I picked on my favorite standards of all time, which is the NEMA 115. The NEMA 115 is the US plug, the 110 plug that we all use, and it's all on all our appliances. So this goes back to 1905-ish, in that sort of era, when people were building electric generators and power plants in all over the place in the country. And they were obviously needing to connect them to lights and appliances, and they were using all sorts of manufactured plugs. And you can imagine that they were not very safe, so there were people dying all over the place, literally. And so a group of people decided that this needs to stop, and they got together and basically put together this what is now NEMA 115. But at that point, NEMA did not exist, because there were no, NEMA is the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. So you can imagine there were no manufacturers association before all of that. So the 115 was actually the motivation for creating NEMA as a standard that they obviously worked on for several years. It became a standard, I think, around 1920, which is about the same time that NEMA, the organization, was created. The thing that I sort of want to point out here is the sort of the strip along the bottom. They did that, right, in the sort of the time frame of 1910, let's say. And they had no idea that in 1920 radio station would broadcast stuff, so they would need this to plug in their radios. Everybody would have radios to use NEMA 115. They didn't have any ideas in 1940 that television broadcasts would start. And so when they started making TVs, obviously they used NEMA 15. Or there are other variations of NEMA 15 for bigger voltages and earth and no earth. There's other sort of variations of it. And they obviously didn't understand back in 1910 that when we get to 1970s, we would be connecting computers and all sorts of electronics onto using NEMA 15. And they had no idea that we would convert a NEMA 15 standard, or we would use the NEMA 15 standard to create these sort of USB dongles. None of that was foreseen back in 1910. That's the point, right? And yet it enabled all of that. And this is a US standard. Again, this is the story of the US standard of this thing that we use all the time. But there was actually an interesting story, an interesting parallel story with another organization called IEC, which is the International, basically Electricity Consortium, or whatever the C stands for. And they actually tried round about 1910 to create an international standard, but they failed because the market was not mature enough. It was very mature in the US, because people were dying and all of that kind of stuff. The need for a standardization was obvious, but obviously they didn't get much traction anywhere else, right? So they did not prevail on an international basis. And we all now know that all of the different countries implemented all sorts of variants of the NEMA 115, the US way of doing things. Some actually used it. Many created their own standards, right? But IEC, what's sort of interesting about IEC is they created this other standard called the 60320, long number. But it's something that we're also very familiar with. This is something that typically goes onto small appliances, radios. We don't have radios anymore, shavers and things like that. So that came out in 1970s because there was a need for the sort of smaller form factor. And what's sort of interesting to me is that some of you would recognize what this is. It is an Apple power dongle, basically, that you plug in your MacBook to. What's interesting to me, and I've always found this a very, very sort of fascinating piece of innovation, is this little dongle, this little thing that they created, Apple created. This is a brilliant piece of engineering if you think about it, because it actually uses NEMA 15 and C8, which is what this is, two standards into one, so that they can actually create this charging device in a way so that for foreign countries where they have different plugs, they still have this part the same. And this part of it, I should have put another picture of the UK plug, which is a huge thing. But the point is the C8 part of it remained the same. So they standardized on that. So the point I'm making here is that you can create standards that have huge implications, and implications on use cases that you really had absolutely no way of knowing. There's no way that anybody back in 1910 would even understand the concept of this slide here or what we're talking about. So that's really the sort of the point that I kind of wanted to make here, is that when we're talking about governance and standards is necessary to enable this kind of stuff. And the thing that makes it work over, in this case, a century, is that it's governed properly. It's actually governed rather than just let to be used. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to stop my share because I don't have any more slides, and we can see where that goes. Any opening thoughts?
So why, Anto, do you think the standard itself has not changed at all? So the electrical plug, obviously the Europeans, there's different, UK has one standard, the mainland has another standard. I think the Swiss have a third. But there hasn't been any, over the course of 100 years, the plug is still the same. And yet, as you point out, the particularly now, the way power needs to be brought to these different types of devices tends to go against the use of the standards. So the standard has stayed fixed, despite the fact that it hasn't seemed to evolve in any meaningful way. Apple got creative, as you pointed out, but the standards body itself is basically their governance approach is, we're not changing. That's it. Right.
If you remember last week, we talked about this Collingridge dilemma. I think it's actually to do with that. because the Collingridge dilemma says that at the early stages, so in the case of the 115 back in the early 1900s, right, it was actually possible to create that standard, to actually define it. But once it became used, and in the case of 115, it gets used, millions and millions and millions of times, literally.
Right.
It's almost impossible to change.
Right.
Right. The same happens in the UK. They did not adopt the NEMA 15. They went a completely different route for whatever reason. Same in Australia. And all of those sort of implementations got embedded into those societies, and it's almost impossible to change. It's not impossible, but it's really, really hard. Because you think about all of the homes and everything else you have to rewire.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great sort of illustration of that dilemma.
I believe your example is a great example, and it shows what it really comes down to is an interface. In this case, an electrical interface. The overreach is where if you came out with that standard and said, nope, you got to use 220 volts or 110 volt, and you couldn't have compatibility across different voltages, let alone whatever device that's being powered upstream. That's overreach. And so I think that's the problem, with our industry, is that we have this overreach thing where we're going to tell you not only what the interface is going to look like, but also the quantity and the protocol and the voltage or the methodology, and then even extending beyond that, what functionality you're allowed to use or perform on the high level device that's being powered by the interface. So I think that's a great example, Anto. Perfect. Yeah, that's a standard. That's a good standard.
Did you overreach there a little bit, because this standard, the 115 standard, includes the voltage?
Yeah, but I'm not forced to use that in whatever electrical device I'm using.
But as a standard, it is how it becomes a standard. So that's how it's tested, and that's how everybody assumes that it's 115, because the standard is for 115. I've gone to Europe with a NEMA 115 and plugged it to a 240 and blow up my computer or blow up something. That's easy to do, but because I was not using the standard properly.
Yeah. But what happens if you don't care to use the standard? I mean, this is electrical stuff now, so we're talking, this is safety and compatibility and stuff like that. But the point is that, yeah, governance is fine when it's constricted to what is supposed to be being governed.
Any other thoughts on this?
I was thinking of BACnet and how standards get entrenched over time, de facto standards, de jure standards, and the common thing about the NEMA standard that you just showed is that it became the standard over an intermediate period of time, right? So the problem was, as soon as electricity came out, as you said, in 2005, by the 1920s, it was very clear that there was a compelling need for this. But that standard spent the next 100 years getting entrenched. And I thought of, how the United States tried to switch from the English standard system to the metric system, and basically failed over time. It was decided that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze to make that switch. And then I look at the context of BACnet, and I think, well, it's getting entrenched over a 30-year period in many quarters of the world, in a way that's very durable and resilient. But I think the difference is that something like the BACnet standard had evolutionary thoughts built into it. So unlike the NEMA 115, which has been sort of intransigent over the 100 years, the BACnet standard's been more evolutionary. And I think for the time we live in, that's a better bet.
In a way, that's the answer to Danielle's question. The difference between hardware and software. That's one of the differences, is the hardware, like the 115, you sort of specify, and once people manufacture them, you You can't update them. You can't upgrade them. But software is a different, the sort of the firmness of a standard is able to be changed if it needed to be.
Right. So I guess you have to think about what's the natural time constant that something needs to change. And obviously into the face of AI or things that are extremely dynamic, other changes in the world, the question is, how fast can something evolve? And I think a key point to make is you don't necessarily want this stuff to evolve that quickly, right? One of the problems is with that evolution, you're voiding, or you may be voiding backwards compatibility. I think that, that compatibility path and the critical mass of not changing it has to be outweighed by value being created elsewhere. In other words, the juice has to be worth the squeeze in order to change it.
Yeah.
Rick, you when I was working on this and you and I were chatting about this, you'd suggested maybe we think about something like very, very non-electronic, like the railway gauge, which probably went through a somewhat of a similar sort of history.
Yeah, in terms of like just the academic thinking about standards or thinking about anything, sometimes it's useful to get an example that's outside of the domain that you're entrenched in, and that was sort of the point of like, whether it's a standard for the gauge of railroads that finally opened up the railroads, or geez, there's standards for all kinds of things in all kinds of different industries that we could spend time on that that I think people interestingly may have different attitude about, well, how did that industry flourish, with or without standards? And we know for sure that we are not done evolving in this industry, or I would like to think that's a common understanding. So, I mean, I think that that's a fairly easy statement to make. Do we all agree that we're not done evolving? And if we are, maybe we need to look to other industries as to how governance and how standards opened up the innovation in other industries for examples, rather than just look backwards over the last. Although it's interesting to see how the mechanisms of this industry work, because we got to be able to be compliant with it, and I think we're doing that. I mean, we're taking innovation, partnering with ASHRAE, partnering with NIST, but I think that looking at how innovation in other industries has caused or allowed for really rapid innovation is instructive. And now, if we think that we're done evolving, then that's a different issue. But I kind of think we're not. I think we're just at the beginning, the early stages. And then the other thing was the time constants, which I don't disagree with. Standards take a long time to happen, but on the railroads and kind of studying some of this stuff, and that happened fairly quickly. Once there was consensus on it, it happened quickly. And then, oh my God, the amount of wealth and innovation that happened and the way business models changed because the standard got in place. The amount of innovation and wealth. I'm here in Kansas City, and over the period of, you guys heard me talk about this before. Once the railroads were in place, the business model of how lumber happened and how crackers and biscuits happened were amazing. And the number of 25 to 50,000 square foot mansions that were built in Kansas City over a period of 10 years was all on the back of new business models because of the railroads. And they were all built, all that wealth was generated in a very short period of time because standards hit the idea of standards for railroads hit, and all of a sudden new business models were able to happen. And that's where I think our looking at where we can still grow to is what I'm excited about. And then, yeah, there needs to be some level of adaptability to standards is kind of what I was thinking.
So I was just going to pick up on Roger's comment about railroad tracks being the width of wagon wheels. Roughly, yes, but I don't think roughly was adequate for it to become a standard. It had to be precise. I think that's the point. And I think the various railway gauges that exist even still today all exist, and they're all roughly the width of wagon wheels, give or take quite a number of inches, but the precision is what's necessary. That's just what I came to mind. So I'm going to throw that to Ken. Do you think this industry is done? Are we sort of innovated enough for everything? Rick was asking that question.
Actually, I think Danielle made a great comment in chat there. She said what I took out of it is that there's both physical standards and virtual standards, and I think that's what we need. And so to answer your question, our virtual standards, I don't even believe they've started yet. I think we're just evolving them daily. The physical ones are, the voltages and stuff. I don't see really big changes there. But again, I think what we're focused on virtually is a virtual standard. So I think, yes, they're very, very loosey-goosey and flexible. And I think we'll be have to come up with how are we going to handle this, because it doesn't fit anything that we already have in place. So that'll be my take on that.
So Ken, I think I agree with you with regard to the virtual standards. We've been trying different things, whether it's the BACnet protocol or haystack and brick, tagging and as Rick mentioned earlier, UDMI. There's just here, there, and everywhere we're trying to come up with standards to create standardization in the virtual space. But interestingly, I was wondering what you guys think about the fact that we started out with 110, 115 volts and then the plug that you pointed out, and increasingly we're going to DC 24 volts, right? And I'm just looking at a couple laptops sitting in front of me. What do I got? Power packs plugged into a 110 outlet with a 24 volt power pack connected to it. Just think about how that's been proliferated across the universe, right? In various forms. And because in Europe, of course, it's 220 or 230 to 24 volts, but DC is DC. How many houses are being built, and how many buildings are being built with DC plugins, right?
Yeah, Steve, there's been a move afoot. That problem happened when Tesla lost to Edison,
right.
couple 150 years ago, 120 years ago. But what's happening now is there's a group called the eMerge Alliance and others that are trying to actually push DC, right. Especially in residential, and they have the backing of some large utilities. Mm-hmm. But I think, as Anto pointed out, man, that's an uphill climb, because everything on the planet is now driven by AC. And to me, this is an instance where you don't have that order of magnitude improvement for switching to DC. The value proposition is too thin, and the inertia of the AC standards is too high. Right. So I think it's a tough sell, even though logically you're right. And you would get rid of a lot of the conversion. And the other thing that's happened is the conversion electronics has become a lot cheaper. In the day, the step up, step down transformer that AC current allowed was the compelling driver. We have DC and solid state electronics that do a much happier job of that now. But, once again, can you fight the tape of 120 years of inertial frame moving along with AC? Really hard.
But what's sort of interesting is all of us and all of the audience are sitting in front of DC devices.
Right.
Just want to point that out.
That's my point. That's my point.
David, you want to say something?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've been talking about standards, but not as much about governance. And I think that the world of the ISO standards is not familiar enough in North America and especially in the US. And when we look at utilities and building utility usage, the actual universal way it's that usage is being reported is with ISO 14064. And 14061 is corporate greenhouse gas governance and organizational emissions reporting standards. And this is across energy industries, pharmaceutical industries, etc. It's late. The real estate industry is late to the game. And also with 14064-2, it's project governance and it's emissions reduction project reporting. And 14063 is independent verification governance. And so governance goes hand in hand with the reporting process and secondary attestation of those results. And so when we look at all of the utility consumption data, embodied carbon and operational carbon that our systems and all of the different building systems ultimately need to report to, it's actually governed by that when you get to the actual accounting standards and financial reporting standards. And so when you look at weaving together governance and standards, it's basically what is the ultimate reporting requirement. And I think there's an opportunity to leverage these standards. And the one I'm most familiar with is ISO 19650, which is the BIM standards. But with the BIM standards, they have governance at the beginning as well, and especially around contract requirements and putting into the agreements with the architects and the engineers and the GCs and the subs exactly what their responsibilities are. And that type of governance is woefully missing, and owners in our industry don't even know what to ask for or even bother. And I love that Jim brought up, I think it was Jim that brought up that we failed in switching to metric in the 70s. I think that's like indicative of so many things now when you look at the US and embracing, building efficiencies and things other countries are doing around the world and nobody's arguing about. And yet we're still fumbling with these socket sets with all these weird fractions. Doesn't make sense.
So you're saying that, are you saying that in addition to, we've been talking about hardware standards and virtual standards, you're sort of saying that there's also process standards, are they similarly different? They're different to the other two.
Absolutely. And it's actually the governance of how you do everything. And when you look at the governance, when I worked at Arup, it was an ISO 9001 company. So we had to get all of our testing equipment, like for acoustics and air quality, we had to get those attested to make sure that our results actually are verifiable and have assurance that there's accuracy with it. And so there's a whole world of governance around all of this that I feel, woefully ill-informed about. And we can leverage governance to give us the governance framework to actually implement these changes we're all talking about. And I think using ISO 19650 for all the agreements with everyone doing the work, and then also keeping an eye on 14064 for all of the reporting requirements, regardless of what you think of the need or political aspect to it, it still needs to be acknowledged, and every energy industry is doing it. Real estate's going to have to do it. Or actually, it's happening everywhere outside the US. So it's kind of not everywhere, obviously, but Europe and all institutional investors require ESG reporting now. And it's all based on ISO 14064. And it's just not something that's being talked about much in this country.
We like to ignore that stuff. Could you start over? Just kidding.
No.
But it is kind of true. It's like, and if you want to do business internationally, though, all of a sudden, somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hey," and again, to talk about him a lot, very proud of him. My son is a contracts attorney, right? He's a IP and contracts attorney. That's all he deals with is compliance with standards and best practices and all that. But I'm wanting to kind of go back to there are standards bodies in place that are anticipating the fact that change is going to happen, and that's where I think we need to talk about, do we feel like this industry is done innovating? And if it is, we don't have to worry about any kind of compliance or any kind of process or any kind of institutions that would be perhaps in place to help guide compliance with standards. And I would assert that I've seen innovation flourish when standards happen, and I've seen fortunes be made when people come together around agreeing on a way to get something standardized. So my bias is towards, I don't think this industry is done, and I do think the innovation comes from bringing people together to agree on
Rick,
standards.
Rick, honestly, I don't think anybody believes that we're done innovating. That's a extreme rhetorical question. I think the question is whether or not we should flourish first and create a standard, or create standards to flourish. And I think
Keith, I don't think you're talking to many GCs.
Yeah. I mean, we're obviously we're going to innovate. Like that's a rhetorical question, right?
I don't know. I don't know. We don't act like it.
What's astounding is when you look at construction productivity, we're lower than we were 100 years ago. Think about that. That is so pathetic.
I'm a technologist, not a construction person, but
I understand. I give you that, absolutely. But when you look at a lack of innovation, the construction industry is the worst culprit, I think, in the world. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous how low trade productivity is. It has not budged.
And that's driven by procurement, as I've said many times. It's the procurement lock-in that kills all the value creation.
And we're a sub to a sub to a sub. If we were talking about the controls business is buried in. Again, most people in our industry don't even know that we're part of Division 23. Never heard of it. We're buried as a sub to a sub to a sub, and yeah, it's procurement. No, there's no innovation. Yes, it would seem that all of us would benefit from a quest for innovation. But I mean, again, Keith, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I don't think we are done.
Yeah,
but
I got out of the quarry. Like I'm not. I'm an AI software company.
We get that, and we're on the same page. We're on the same page. I'm just saying, there's not a lot of evidence anywhere else. It's like I need to see more hands up.
Back in the day, in the middle of BACnet, when BACnet was coming on, it definitely was an American standard. But in my mind, what moved it on is when it became an international standard, and it was built by Germany and Australia. They were looking for a standard, and when they found BACnet, they said, "Wow, this is a very good standard. We will support it." And we're not. But we still had the fight going on in America that the people that were controlling the controls did not want this standard, because the standard was going to be the end of them, or basically going to make them change. And so we have a bit of that problem. The people who make the standards sometimes have mixed emotions.
So Ken, by 1995, BACnet had become the American national standard. And Steve Bushby and Mike Newman very, very carefully engineered the international standardization of BACnet. It was a concerted strategy over the years with ISO and voting, and it was very successful. BACnet still was in trouble in the market. So in 1999, I founded the BACnet Manufacturers Association, which is now BACnet International. And I built the first governance for the standard for that industry, which is the BTL testing. And I think that it was successfully done. But the thing I want to point out is that the market participants wanted that governance, right? We appeared at a time to create the BACnet testing laboratories when people wanted it. There was a business problem that they needed to solve. And that business problem is that BACnet was an open standard, but you couldn't tell who was adhering to it properly. And so that governance was created for that reason. It was driven by competitors, by different manufacturers that wanted to set table stakes for what the requirements would be. And I think it was a great accelerant to BACnet over time. And I think that same kind of approach can be taken today to some of the innovation that Keith's working on or others that, can you get an area in technology where we can level the playing field? And this may be a place where C4SB and some of these other standards can come in. And can we create not only the technology and the standards, but trust, if you will? You're basically selling trust to those general contractors that David was talking about. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we need to do going forward.
But trust is a key aspect of having a standard, because you're trusting the standard. And in the NEMA 115, you're trusting the standard so that you plug it in and I don't die. So it's all about trust.
Well, and one of the things I'm going to go back to, I'm going to say it again, is that what we're doing in terms of pushing forward standards at C4SB, we're not making up the standards. We're trying to link with, you mentioned Mike Newman and Steve Bushby. Steve Bushby, I believe, was where 223 got started.
Correct.
And so these are very you can take some credit for it too, I'm sure, but these are very thoughtful people that are thinking about the future, that are very convinced that we're not done innovating. And so some of these proposed standards that are coming from ASHRAE, like 223, 231, et cetera, are ones that we're at C4SB, we're excited to be putting in play and running through their paces and pushing the envelope and seeing what breaks, maybe. Hopefully nothing breaks. But these are so then, like UDMI, referring to UDMI, these are very, very thoughtful people that have spent 5 years or more with UDMI. The people who are working on knowledge graphs, that's 20 years worth of work on how the World Wide Web Consortium, a bunch of really smart people, came up with some new constructs about how data should be structured. So we're trying to say that there's a lot of trust that should come from the legacy of where these things are coming from, and we're just then trying to put them at play and push them a little bit. And BACnet Cloud Collective is another great example, bringing in Lawnmark. And yeah, it's important for us to be able to build on the trust, but with this assumption that we're just not done. We're on the front edge of innovation.
I totally agree with that. But let me point out that we are not the only ones that have been in the trust business. If you look at the business models of the independent test labs, the United States, underwriters laboratories, there's a whole underpinning of test labs in different markets and industries that are testing everything from the efficacy of car brakes to tires to material science to how fast a fabric burns. There's a lot of governance that's already baked into the society that we don't talk about. And what we have to decide is what the right governance is to advance the field. And I think that has to be really carefully considered, because no one wants the first thing you think of if you're a product manufacturer and you look at all the test standards and the protectionism, frankly, that the Europeans erect by, taking that to the 10th power. Governance has to be carefully considered so it doesn't choke off innovation.
And that's exactly right. We're leading with that. We're leading with trust, build the trust for, I'm not against any sort of standard, but you can approach it from both ways. They're not mutually exclusive. Why did we take the guardrails off our AI? We're building trust. We got to lead with that.
Okay, we need to wrap up here. Kimon, you've been very quiet. Would you care to spend 30 seconds just wrapping up? And what have you heard here?
Yeah, I think trust and privacy is not the problem. It is a problem, but there's a deeper level to that too. It's kind of integrity and knowing who you're asking to trust. So trust is kind of a black and white thing. Do I trust or not? There's also kind of an integrity layer. How do you know that whatever you're interacting with it has integrity? And that goes to having other kinds of information so you can make that decision. And what I heard from the conference too is that that's from an AI perspective. If we think of AI and humans, we kind of look at each other and we can kind of decide on the fly, but AI is pretending like it's a human, therefore it looks like it has integrity, but really might not. So it's kind of a double-edged thing going on there, which is interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Kimon. Thanks, everyone. I think we should wrap this. It's been a great conversation, and we'll get the video up and we'll be back next week.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a great week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.